The evening air along County Road 35 felt thick that night, heavy with the sweetness of cut hay and the low growl of thunder somewhere off in the distance. 16-year-old Rebecca Hamilton glanced at her watch. 6:42 p.m. It was setting faster than she'd anticipated. She hitched up the strap of her grocery bag from Morrison's General Store and picked up her pace. The walk home, just 2 miles, was one she'd made countless times, but that night it somehow felt different, longer, uneasy. Behind her a car approached, headlights stretching her shadow across the gravel shoulder. Rebecca turned slightly. Maybe she recognized it, maybe not. Then, in an instant, that would haunt Galesburg, Michigan, for generations. She was gone. No scream, no sign of a struggle, just silence. That September evening in 1978 became a wound that never truly healed. For 41 long years, the Hamilton family and the people of Galesburg clung to hope as it slowly slipped away. Search parties came and went, leads dried up. The case grew colder with every passing season. Then in 2019, 4 words cracked open the quiet. 4 words that would turn decades of grief into shock and reveal a truth few could have imagined. The DNA didn't belong to a stranger, not a drifter, not a known criminal. It matched Harold Jenkins, the 68-year-old owner of Jenkins Hardware on Main Street, a man beloved by nearly everyone in town, former church deacon, Little League coach, the same man who'd helped organize the first search parties for Rebecca, who stood shoulder to shoulder with her parents at every candlelight vigil. When that revelation broke, it split Galesburg in two. Friends against friends, neighbors questioning neighbors. How could someone so trusted carry such darkness for so long? And what happens to a town when the monster they've been searching for turns out to be one of their own? Before we dig deeper into this chilling case, a story that indeed proves evil sometimes hides behind the kindest smile, make sure to hit subscribe. If you're drawn to the way modern science is cracking open cold cases and delivering long overdue justice, you'll want to stay tuned. Rebecca Lynn Hamilton was the kind of girl who lit up a room without even trying. At 16, she was tall, 5'8", with auburn hair that glowed like copper in the sun. Photography was her passion. Her bedroom walls in the family's modest farmhouse on Wentworth Lane were covered in Polaroids. Horses at the county fair, sunsets over Gull Lake, her little brothers frozen mid-laughter. She never walked, her mother Margaret once told investigators. She bounced. Rebecca had the gift of making you feel like what you were saying really mattered. She was only beginning her junior year at Galesburg Augusta High in September of 1978. Her dreams reached much farther than Kalamazoo County. In her diary, found untouched on her desk, she wrote about wanting to study photojournalism at Michigan State University. She was saving every dollar from babysitting in a coffee tin marked NYC Fund. One day she wanted to capture life in the city that, so far, she only knew from glossy magazines. Her English teacher, Diane Lawson, recalled her as bright and bold. Rebecca wasn't afraid to ask the questions other students kept to themselves. She wrote for the school newspaper, played clarinet in the marching band, and still managed straight A's. Her father, Thomas, said once, "That girl never wasted a minute of daylight." Thursday, September 14th, 1978, began like any other day. The alarm clock buzzed at 6:15 a.m. Her mother remembered hearing the shower run 10 minutes later and the familiar creak of the third stair when Rebecca came down for breakfast at 6:45. She had toast with strawberry jam and chatted excitedly about yearbook committee assignments being announced that day. She was out the door by 7:10 a.m., walking with her neighbor, Susan Fletcher, to catch the school bus at the corner. School records reveal that Rebecca didn't have any problems in any of her classes that Thursday. Her friend Susan remembered how happy she'd been at lunch, grinning from ear to ear because she'd just been named photography editor for the yearbook. It was exactly the kind of role everyone expected her to shine in. After the final bell, Rebecca stayed a little longer for a short yearbook committee meeting that wrapped up around 4:15 p.m. Instead of hopping on the late bus, she told Susan she needed to grab a few groceries for her mom, who'd been laid up with the flu. "Soup and ginger ale," she'd said with a smile. Always dependable, that was Becca through and through. Her father, Thomas Hamilton, would later explain that's why she decided to walk to Morrison's General Store instead of heading straight home. Grainy black and white footage from Morrison's security camera, remarkably still preserved decades later, shows Rebecca walking in at 5:37 p.m. She spent about 23 minutes shopping, neatly paying cashier Donna Meeks with exact change right at 6 p.m. The receipt listed 3 cans of Campbell's chicken noodle soup, 2 bottles of Canada Dry Ginger Ale, bread, milk, and 1 Hershey's chocolate bar. Her mom, Margaret, would later tell police that the candy bar probably was Rebecca's little treat for finishing the errand, a small detail that still breaks hearts to this day. At 6:03 p.m., Rebecca was caught on camera one last time, cinching her blue windbreaker as she stepped out into the cooling September air. The walk home should have taken no more than 35 to 40 minutes, just under 2 miles along County Road 35, a quiet 2-lane stretch flanked by cornfields and the occasional farmhouse. By 6:52 p.m., with thunder rolling closer, Margaret grew uneasy. She called Morrison's to check in. Donna confirmed Rebecca had left nearly an hour earlier. By 7:15, rain had started to fall. Thomas grabbed his truck keys and drove the familiar route, headlights cutting through the storm. At 7:43 p.m., his world stopped. There, 2 miles away from the store, lay Rebecca's grocery bag scattered along the shoulder. The milk carton had burst into a white puddle that mingled with rainwater and mud. The Hershey bar remained in its wrapper, untouched. Nearby was her denim shoulder bag, house key, change, and her Kodak Instamatic camera all still inside. Nothing was missing, nothing stolen, but Rebecca was gone. What happened in those fleeting moments as dusk settled over the fields? Did she recognize the driver of that oncoming car? Did she sense danger too late? Did she try to run or even cry out? The corn that year was tall, almost 6 feet, heavy with ripe ears and secrets, silent witnesses to whatever had occurred that night. And then came the detail that still chills investigators decades later. When police developed the film inside Rebecca's camera, they found one final undeveloped photo. The picture showed the partial license plate of a blue pickup truck, taken from what looked like hip level, as if snapped quickly, almost secretly. Was it just an artistic experiment from a teenage photographer? Or had some instinct warned her, prompting her to take one last picture? For 41 years, that question gnawed at everyone who loved her. And here's a question for you. Where are you watching from? Have you ever lived in a small town where everyone knows everyone else's name? Where the cashier at the general store asks how your mom's feeling before you even mention she's sick? That is what Galesburg was, a place where people thought secrets could not hide. But Rebecca's case would break that illusion, showing the unsettling truth that sometimes the darkest of secrets live right next door. By midnight on September 14th, County Road 35 was a muddy, rain-soaked mess. Dozens of police officers and volunteer firefighters trudged through the storm, forming the first search party. Sheriff Raymond Collins came out himself, hauling in spotlights borrowed from the high school football field. They searched tirelessly through cornfields, along ditches, down to the old drainage tunnels since around 4 a.m., when the downpour made it impossible to continue. We knew those first 24 hours were critical, Collins later told reporters, but the rain wiped out everything: footprints, tire tracks, anything we could have used. At dawn on September 15, the storm finally began to pass. The Morrison's parking lot was filled with 50 volunteers who stood, coffee in hand, face etched with exhaustion and dread. Before them stood Thomas Hamilton, hoarse from shouting his daughter's name through the night. "Rebecca is smart," he said, voice trembling but steady. "She's strong." "She'd fight," Thomas Hamilton said, his voice cracking but firm. "She'd run." Something happened that stopped her from coming home. And with that, the search widened, fast. By dawn, the area had been expanded to 5 square miles. Volunteer pilots from the Kalamazoo airport joined in, flying slow, low passes over endless fields. Michigan State Police brought in tracking dogs. The dogs followed Rebecca's scent from the spot where her groceries were found, about 100 yards east before the trail abruptly vanished. No more scent, no more sign of struggle, just nothing. It was as if she'd stepped off the earth. Investigators concluded she'd likely been forced into a vehicle. By noon that Friday, the Galesburg fire station had been set up as an improvised command post. In charge was Sergeant Patricia Delano, only the second woman detective in the department's history. Sharp, methodical, and calm by nature, she spotted something that bothered her. Her first report read, "Inconsistencies are present throughout the witness statements, suggesting either confusion or deliberate misdirection." Three were the key witnesses. First was Donna Meeks, the cashier at Morrison's. She first told police Rebecca had left the store alone at 6:03 p.m. But in a second interview, she added something new, that Harold Jenkins, the hardware store owner, had been leaving at the same time. They said hello to each other, she noted. When asked why she hadn't mentioned that earlier, Donna looked embarrassed. "I didn't think it mattered," she said. "Mr. Jenkins shops here all the time." Then there was Frank Whitaker, a farmer heading home from the grain elevator. He said he saw Rebecca walking along County Road 35 around 6:20 p.m. Alone, calm, nothing unusual. But when investigators asked his wife, who'd been in the passenger seat, she couldn't confirm the sighting. "I was dozing off," she admitted. Finally, Leah Turnbull, a 72-year-old widow who lived in a farmhouse across from where Rebecca's things were found. Leah told police she'd heard a short, sharp scream around 6:40 p.m. When she looked out her window, she saw nothing out of the ordinary. Just a blue pickup truck slowing down, maybe because of the rain. When detectives later showed her the photo from Rebecca's camera, the one with the partial license plate, Leah squinted and frowned. "My eyes aren't what they used to be," she said softly. She couldn't confirm if it was the same truck. Still, that blue pickup became the investigation's first real lead. Within days, on September 16th, police recorded each and every blue pickup in Kalamazoo County, a total of 212. One of those belonged to none other than Harold Jenkins. His vehicle was a 1972 Ford F-100. Jenkins was the man Rebecca had encountered at Morrison's. Questioned by police, Jenkins was calm and cooperative. Yes, he said, he'd seen Rebecca at the store. No, he hadn't spoken to her beyond a polite hello. Afterwards, he said, he'd gone straight to a church board meeting. 5 church elders corroborated his alibi, although he was indeed with them. He had been there from 6:30 to 8:15 p.m. His truck was examined and found pristine and returned promptly. Just one of dozens cleared in those frantic early days. That same evening, September 16th, the Hamilton family made their first appearance on television. The local station, WWMT, aired their plea across Michigan. Margaret Hamilton, her face streaked with tears, looked straight into the camera. "Someone took our daughter," she said. "Someone knows where she is. Please, if you know anything, anything at all, call the police. We just want her home." That night, 157 calls poured into the tip line. Officers investigated each and every one. They interviewed Rebecca's ex-boyfriend. He had a solid alibi, surrounded by teammates at football practice. They interviewed known offenders within a 50-mile radius. They searched abandoned barns, old wells, hunting cabins. Each lead ended in a dead end. By September 18th, 4 days after Rebecca disappeared, the search parties were thinning out. The national media arrived briefly, but by evening they'd packed up, drawn away by a child abduction case in Chicago. Sheriff Collins called for backup from the Michigan State Police. 2 more detectives came onto the case, but they too found themselves boxed in by a lack of evidence, washed away by that relentless storm. Meanwhile, something heavy was settling in the air in Galesburg. Fear. Parents who had once allowed their children to walk to the bus stop began driving them there instead. Jenkins Hardware quickly sold out of deadbolts and window locks. Morrison's installed brighter lights outside and even offered to escort customers to their cars after dark. The Reverend Michael Simmons addressed the unease in his Sunday sermon. "This isn't a community that locks its doors," he told his congregation, "but evil has visited us, and we don't know where it's hiding." What no one had realized, what no one could have imagined, was that evil wasn't hiding at all. It was there all along, standing right beside them, in church pews, at town safety meetings, handing out coffee to volunteers searching the very fields where Rebecca disappeared. The people of Galesburg never knew that while they prayed for justice, the one guilty was among them, perfectly blending in with their concern and kindness. When we step back and look at what we know, the scattered groceries, the sudden stop of the scent trail, that mysterious blue pickup, and Rebecca's final haunting photograph, We can almost see the outline of what happened that night on County Road 35. The truth was always there, hidden in plain sight. It would just take 41 years for the world to finally notice. By December 1978, Rebecca Hamilton's face had quietly vanished from the evening news. The posters that once covered Galesburg storefronts had faded, their corners curling, her smile worn thin under the Michigan winter sun. The investigation that once involved 20 officers was now confined to a single filing cabinet in Detective Delano's office. The case technically open, but for all practical purposes, abandoned. It's like she evaporated, Thomas Hamilton told the Kalamazoo Gazette in a one-year anniversary story. A small piece buried on page 7. But he said something else too, something that stuck. Someone knows. Someone has carried this secret for a year now. The Hamiltons never used the words murder or kidnapping. To them, she hadn't been lost forever, just gone. They still said disappearance, as if leaving the door open might somehow help her find her way home. They left her bedroom exactly as it had been on that Thursday morning. Homework still open on the desk, a half-read copy of The Great Gatsby, the page folded over to 87. Every week, Margaret dusted the room, careful, tender, like her daughter might burst through the door at any moment, complaining that someone had moved something. Through the early 1980s, Rebecca's case would resurface now and then. Each time a nearby disappearance made the news, detectives would reopen her file, chasing connections that never panned out. In 1982, a prison inmate in Jackson claimed to know her remains' whereabouts. But that also was a lie, another desperate ploy for a reduced sentence. Every false lead, Margaret later wrote to her sister, is like losing her all over again. But not knowing, that's worse than any truth could ever be. By the 5th anniversary in 1983, Rebecca would have been 21, a college graduate perhaps starting her dream career in photojournalism. Instead, classmates left an empty chair for her at high school graduation, draped with her marching band jacket. That same year, Thomas Hamilton established the Rebecca Hamilton Memorial Scholarship for aspiring photographers. The first fundraiser, a spaghetti dinner at the Galesburg fire station, attracted more than 300 people. Among the volunteers, smiling and serving plates of pasta, was Harold Jenkins. He donated supplies from his hardware store and even acted as master of ceremonies. Rebecca's spirit lives on through the talents she'll help nurture in others, said Jenkins from the podium, his voice catching with emotion. Though I only knew her as a customer, her story has touched us all. Those words would sound far more chilling decades later. 10 years after Rebecca vanished in 1988, the case flickered back to life. By then, Detective Patricia Delano had risen through the ranks to become captain and wasn't ready to let go of the mystery that had haunted her entire career. With new forensic tools finally available, she ordered the re-examination of every piece of evidence saved from 1978. Rebecca's denim bag, the scattered groceries, even soil samples from the roadside. The results were limited, but one detail stood out in Delano's supplemental report. Degraded blood evidence on victims' bags suggests that blunt force trauma occurred at an abduction site. A grim hint, but still not enough to name a suspect. The Hamiltons did not give up. Every September 14th, they gathered at dusk on County Road 35, right where Rebecca's groceries had been found. The vigil started with hundreds, then dozens, then a small circle of family and close friends. Year after year, through rain, through snow, or on those crisp autumn nights that looked too much like the one she vanished, they stood with candles and photographs, determined to keep her memory alive. Margaret started a tradition at those vigils, reading aloud from Rebecca's diary, words frozen in time, forever 16. When I get my driver's license next month, Rebecca had written 2 weeks before she disappeared, I'll drive to Lake Michigan just to watch the sunset. Mom says I'm dramatic, but I think some moments deserve to be witnessed. By 1996, Thomas Hamilton was deceased, still awaiting answers. He never knew that those moments, and his daughter's story, one day would be witnessed by millions. By late April 2018, genealogists working with Michigan State Police traced the mystery DNA to a single surviving branch of the Jenkins family. The name that stunned investigators was Harold Jenkins, who for decades had organized search parties and vigils and stood beside the Hamiltons. Lieutenant Ramirez asked for a surreptitious DNA confirmation. Detectives followed Jenkins to a diner in Battle Creek, where he left a coffee cup behind. 2 days later, the lab results came back. The match was absolute, 99.98% certainty. Harold Jenkins was arrested at 73 years old, at his home behind the same hardware store he'd run for nearly half a century. Inside, investigators found boxes of newspaper clippings about Rebecca's disappearance, old Polaroids of search parties, and in a locked cabinet, a single photograph of Rebecca, taken the day she vanished, the same image police believe she took herself. Confronted with the allegations, Jenkins made no confession, only a chilling comment. Some moments deserve witnessing. The exact line Rebecca had written in her diary 2 weeks before she disappeared. DNA evidence, combined with soil samples from Jenkins' pickup truck, still preserved in a private garage, conclusively tied him to the abduction site. In court, prosecutors disclosed that Jenkins had hit Rebecca over the head with a blunt object after she caught him offering to drive her home in the storm. He'd hidden her body in an unused well behind his family's abandoned property, just 3 miles from where she disappeared. In 2019, 41 years after she vanished, Harold Jenkins was convicted of murder and received a life sentence without parole. As the verdict was read, Margaret Hamilton, 78 at the time, whispered, "Now she can rest." A search warrant was executed at the home and business of Jenkins on October 15, 2018. What officers found in the basement of the 2-story house behind Jenkins' hardware would redefine both the investigation and the town itself. Behind a false wall in the workshop, detectives found a secret room, about 8 by 10 feet, that was soundproofed with old insulation and plywood. There was a camera tripod inside, rusted restraints bolted to a support beam, and dozens of labeled boxes containing women's personal items, wallets, jewelry, clothing. Box number 17 was labeled only RH. Inside, sealed in plastic, were items police immediately recognized from evidence photographs. Rebecca Hamilton's denim jacket, her missing camera, and a locket engraved with her initials. Forensic testing confirmed traces of Rebecca's DNA throughout the room. Soil samples from beneath the floorboards matched the ones found on the shoulder of County Road 35. When confronted, Harold Jenkins said only, "You'll never understand why." 2 days later, the cadaver dogs led investigators to an unused drainage well on a parcel once owned by Jenkins' late uncle, 3 miles from where Rebecca vanished. Human remains recovered there were positively identified as Rebecca Hamilton through mitochondrial DNA comparison. For 41 years, her body lay buried less than a mile from the home of the man who comforted her grieving parents. The arrest shattered Galesburg's collective memory. Neighbors who'd trusted Jenkins for decades refused to believe it, until court documents outlined how he'd volunteered to assist in early searches, positioning himself to monitor police progress and redirect suspicion. Harold Edward Jenkins was found guilty of first-degree murder, unlawful imprisonment, and obstruction of justice after a 6-week trial in December 2019. Jenkins was sentenced to serve life without parole. Margaret Hamilton had attended every day of the trial. When the verdict was read, she stood and whispered, "Now she can come home." Rebecca's remains were finally laid to rest beside her father's grave that spring, 41 years after she disappeared. Harold Jenkins had built a life that looked picture-perfect from the outside. He and his wife weren't rich, but they were comfortable living in a lovingly restored Victorian just 6 blocks from his hardware store. At Christmas time, they still hosted caroling parties on the porch, cocoa steaming in mugs, the house aglow with kindness and small-town charm. Nobody suspected the dark lurking beneath all that light. When finally investigators were able to peel the layers back, what they found was horrifying. Court records revealed that as far back as 1970, while he was still in college at Western Michigan University, Jenkins had been questioned in connection with the assault of a female student. The case went nowhere when the victim abruptly left school. Then, in 1975, one of his teenage employees at Jenkins Hardware suddenly quit. The official paperwork called it a workplace misunderstanding. No charges, no follow-up. It would appear that Jenkins had been practicing his deception long before Rebecca Hamilton ever crossed his path. Detectives found a hidden room behind his workshop in the basement of his neat and tidy home. In it sat a single filing cabinet containing 40 years of newspaper clippings, every article ever written about Rebecca's disappearance. It wasn't interest, it was obsession. Even more disturbing, he'd kept photographs from the annual vigils. Pictures showing him year after year, standing a little closer to Rebecca's mother, Margaret Hamilton, until eventually he was her steady companion at every gathering. He didn't just hide his crime, prosecutor Andrea Lawson later told the court. He joined its aftermath. He watched the grief he caused as if it were a play, and he'd written the script. Financial records told their own eerie story. Every year for 4 decades, Jenkins donated the exact same amount to the Rebecca Hamilton Scholarship Fund, $1,142, the precise total that had been in Rebecca's savings account when she disappeared. When detectives asked why, Jenkins quietly said, "I owed her that much at least." On the morning of November 7th, 2018, at 9:17 a.m., Detective Morales entered Jenkins Hardware with 4 officers. Security cameras recorded what happened next. Jenkins was assisting an elderly woman in selecting weather stripping when Morales came up to the counter and clearly said, "Harold Jenkins, we have a warrant for your arrest in connection with the abduction and murder of Rebecca Hamilton." In seconds, Jenkins' face changed, confusion melting into something like weary acceptance. He took his apron off, folded it neatly, set it on the counter, and offered his wrists. "I think Margaret always knew it was me," he said quietly, then asked for a lawyer. Within hours, the story exploded. Local news vans lined Main Street. Customers who had been in the store uploaded videos of the arrest. And by nightfall, it was national news. In Galesburg, shock turned to heartbreak, and then to anger. People gathered outside Jenkins Hardware, leaving flowers and handwritten notes. Others couldn't bring themselves to forgive. That night, vandals shattered the storefront windows, something unheard of in the peaceful town. "I bought my first toolkit from Harold," said Susan Brennan, a 70-year-old retired teacher. "He helped me plan my husband's funeral reception." To find out he did this, it makes you question everything and everyone. It was a betrayal that cut especially deep for those who once searched the cornfields beside him. The firefighters, the neighbors, the friends who genuinely believed his kindness was real. Pastor Robert Wilson, who vouched for Jenkins's church alibi all those years ago, suffered a mild stroke 2 days after the arrest. From his hospital bed, he managed a statement that echoed through every pew in town. "Evil wears many masks, including righteousness. Our church harbored a predator while comforting his victims. May God forgive us all." But no one's heartbreak ran deeper than Margaret Hamilton's. When reporters asked her how she felt, she didn't cry or shout. She said only, "He brought me coffee every September 14th for 40 years. He stood beside me at the very place he left my daughter's things." How do you measure that kind of cruelty? The arrest didn't just end a mystery, it cracked open the heart of an entire town. For some, it brought relief. For others, it broke something that could never quite be fixed. Those who'd known Harold Jenkins their whole lives struggled to reconcile the man they saw on Main Street. The friendly shopkeeper, the volunteer, the neighbor who shoveled their driveway, with the monster revealed by DNA evidence. It forced everyone to confront a truth most of us would rather ignore. Appearances can lie. That smiling neighbor who waves from across the fence, the businessman who sponsors the Little League team, the person you've trusted for years sometimes, they're just playing a part. If this story teaches us anything, it's that darkness does not always hide in the shadows. Many times it also stands right beside us, dressed in kindness. So if you know someone who understands that human nature isn't always what it seems, share this story with them. Because behind the brightest smiles sometimes lie the darkest secrets. When Harold Jenkins finally went to trial on April 15th, 2019, Galesburg seemed to hold its breath. The whole town turned out, packing the courthouse, the overflow rooms, even the steps of the courthouse. For 6 straight days, Michigan tuned in as the so-called trial of the century unfolded live on television. Prosecutor Andrea Lawson reconstructed the past piece by piece, laying out a timeline that wove together modern forensics with evidence long buried since 1978. From Jenkins' basement, police recovered Rebecca Hamilton's student ID and undeveloped photographs from her camera. Grim trophies he'd kept for 40 years. Soil from his yard matched samples preserved from Rebecca's shoes. Phone logs showed he'd called the Hamilton home repeatedly after her disappearance, pretending to check on the search. And then came the discovery that silenced the courtroom. Rebecca's remains. They had been found buried beneath the concrete floor of an old storage shed behind Jenkins' hardware. Records showed the concrete had been poured just days after she vanished. DNA confirmed the unimaginable. Forensic experts revealed defensive fractures on Rebecca's wrists and hands, proof she fought for her life until the end. Rebecca fought her attacker, said medical examiner Dr. Eliza Thornton with steady but heavy tone. The injuries indicate she resisted with great force until the end. Lawyers for Jenkins argued that decades of evidence could have been contaminated, portraying him as a respected man wrongly accused. But when 3 women came forward with disturbing stories of encounters with Jenkins, dating back to 1969, their defense crumbled. None had ever reported it. He was too powerful, too trusted. It wasn't until the 4th day that the man who'd fooled everyone rose from his seat and shocked the courtroom. Jenkins dismissed his attorneys and changed his plea to guilty. His confession was chillingly calm. He told how he'd offered Rebecca a ride as the storm rolled in. She'd politely refused, mentioning her parents' warning about accepting rides from strangers. Something about that rejection, he said, made him irrationally angry. His next words sent waves of horror through the room. "I never meant to become part of the investigation," he said flatly. "But once I did, watching their pain became an addiction. Every vigil, every fundraiser, their grief made me feel powerful. I could cause the pain and then appear to soothe it." Several jurors wept openly. Margaret Hamilton had to be helped from the courtroom. On May 3, 2019, Judge Eleanor Simmons sentenced Harold Jenkins to life in prison without parole. Before this, she looked him right in the eye and said, "For 40 years, you watched a family drown in grief. Grief you caused. Your false compassion makes your crime even more monstrous. You didn't just take a life. You lived off its absence." For the Hamilton family, the verdict brought answers, though not necessarily easy peace. Speaking to the media afterward was Rebecca's younger brother, Thomas Jr., 54. "We accepted comfort from our sister's killer," he quietly said. "We let him into our grief." That truth haunts us almost as much as her loss. Margaret Hamilton, in her late 70s now, finally laid her daughter's remains to rest. "I told her the truth," she said softly to victim advocates. "I told her we never stopped looking, never stopped loving her. And that justice did find its way, even after all these years." For Galesburg, the trial left scars that will never fully fade. Jenkins Hardware, once the town's cornerstone, closed for good. The building was eventually turned into a youth center named after Rebecca Hamilton, a quiet act of redemption for a town that had lost its innocence, but not its hope. Former employees, friends, even his pastor, all struggled to process the betrayal. How many handshakes, conversations, and meals shared with a man who conceals such darkness? Reverend Wilson asked at a community service. It tests your faith in humanity. The case became more than a tragedy. It became a turning point. Forensic genealogy was the same science that exposed Jenkins. It started to solve cold cases all across America. Within the year, 17 long-forgotten murders from the 70s and 80s were finally closed. Detective Morales, who collected that life-changing DNA sample, teaches police nationwide these days, and his words have become something like a mantra for new investigators. For the people of Galesburg, however, one question remains. What do you do when someone you've trusted for years turns out to be a monster? Many residents still look at old photos, community parades, ribbon cuttings, church picnics, and there he is, smiling beside them. And they wonder, should we have seen it? Could we have known? On September 14th, 2020, 42 years to the day since Rebecca Hamilton vanished, Galesburg dedicated a memorial garden on the site where Morrison's General Store used to stand. The bronze statue of a young woman stands at its center. With a camera, she is forever capturing life through her lens. The plaque reads simply, Rebecca Lynn Hamilton. Her story continues to bring truth to light. Each year, students who receive the Rebecca Hamilton Scholarship put together photo documentaries on unsolved cold cases. Already, their work has helped identify victims in 3 other disappearances, turning one family's tragedy into hope for others still waiting. At the age of 80, Margaret Hamilton is still speaking at forensic conferences. Justice delayed, she says softly, is still justice. My daughter waited 41 years, but science gave her a voice. The basement where Rebecca's evidence once sat in dusty boxes has today emerged as the Hamilton Cold Case Laboratory, a state-of-the-art space dedicated to solving the unsolved. Photographs of missing persons line the walls, each one a story still waiting to be heard. Detective Morales summarized it best on the anniversary of Jenkins's conviction. Rebecca Hamilton was silenced at 16, but her case now speaks for victims who've waited decades for the truth. There's no statute of limitations on DNA, no expiration date on evidence. Science evolves, and secrets hidden for generations can be exposed with a single cell. For the thousands of American families still waiting for answers, Rebecca's story offers something rare: hope. For every cold case solved, it reminds us that justice has no timetable. Evidence never stops whispering, and sometimes truth takes the long road home, but it always arrives. If you believe every missing person deserves to have their story told, subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications, because every family deserves answers, and every victim deserves their final chapter.